Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this scene. Across a summer field in Europe, 1944, the ground begins to tremble. From the distance comes a deep, mechanical roar, heavy and menacing, like thunder trapped inside a steel box. Then, suddenly, a cannon thunders. The blast shakes the earth, hurling dirt and smoke skyward. Out of the haze emerges the beast everyone feared, the German Tiger first. In the memory of World War II, the Tiger became more than a tank, it became legend. With armor thicker than 4 inches at the front, and a high-velocity 88mm gun that could punch through enemy steel at a mile away, the Tiger was a nightmare on tracks. For Allied soldiers, to face one was like squaring off against a monster forged from iron. And what did the Allies have to oppose it? The M4 Sherman, the most common American tank of the war, but also the most ridiculed. Crews often joked it was a Ronson, named after the cigarette lighter, because it lights up the first time, every time. Its frontal armor was barely half that of a Tiger. Its 75mm gun seemed underpowered, and many veterans recalled the sinking feeling of seeing their shells bounce harmlessly off German steel. Up against a Tiger, one tanker later admitted, we felt like we were bringing a knife to a gunfight. On paper, the matchup looked hopeless. On one side, German engineering masterpieces, the Tiger, and its sleeker cousin, the Panther. On the other, a mass-produced, thin-skinned American workhorse. The contrast seemed so stark that for decades, the story of tank warfare in World War II has been told as one of German quality versus American quantity. And yet, history tells a different story. For all their power, the Tigers and Panthers did not stop the Allied advance. German armored divisions were bled dry, their fearsome machines abandoned, knocked out, or left smoldering on the battlefield. In the end, it wasn't the Tiger that dictated the course of the war, it was the Sherman. Why? How did an inferior tank consistently overcome machines that, in every technical specification, appeared vastly superior? The most common answer is sheer numbers. America built nearly 50,000 Shermans. Germany built only about 1,300 Tigers, and around 6,000 Panthers. It's tempting to conclude the Allies simply drowned the Germans in steel. But if numbers alone explain victory, how do we account for battles like Arracourt, where Shermans met Panthers head-on, often outnumbered, and still won decisively? The truth is far more intriguing and far less obvious. Because inside every Sherman, hidden from view, was a secret weapon. A weapon that didn't fire shells or stop bullets. A weapon the Germans captured, studied, even touched with their own hands, yet never fully understood. That weapon was the radio. While the world marveled at the Tiger's gun and armor, the Americans invested in something far less glamorous: communication. They believed that the ability to coordinate, to share information in real time, could turn an ordinary tank into part of an extraordinary system. And that belief reshaped the battlefield. This isn't a story about who had the thickest armor or the biggest cannon. It's the story of how invisible radio waves gave the Sherman an advantage that German engineers could never bolt onto steel. It's about how America's focus on connection, on turning individual tanks into a network, transformed what looked like a second-rate machine into one of the most decisive weapons of the war. So the next time you picture a Sherman clattering across a French field, don't just look at the gun or the armor. Think about the headset clamped to the commander's ears, the microphone strapped to his throat, and the quiet hum of a radio set buzzing inside. That, more than anything else, was the Sherman's secret. And it was the secret that changed the war. If you want to understand why the radio inside the Sherman mattered so much, you have to step back to a battlefield before radios ruled the air. Picture the Western Front in World War I. Smoke, mud, a wasteland where armies clawed for yards at a time. Orders were carried by runners sprinting across shell-pocked trenches, by pigeons fluttering through storms of shrapnel, or by bugles and flares desperately trying to pierce the chaos. Tanks had just been born then, slow, lumbering beasts that could crush barbed wire but not communicate. Once a tank rumbled forward, it became an island of steel, cut off from everyone else. Fast forward to the 1,930 seconds. The tank had evolved. It was faster, deadlier. And, in theory, it was supposed to fight as part of a team. But how do you coordinate a team of machines if each one is sealed inside its own armored box? Without radios, the answer was crude. Commanders popped their heads out of hatches, waving flags or signaling with their hands. Some units fired colored flares to indicate attack or retreat. In the heat of battle, those signals were often lost in smoke or ignored in the chaos of survival. Germany was the first to grasp the potential of wireless communication. When the Blitzkrieg rolled into Poland and France, German panzer units carried radios. This was a breakthrough. It allowed their armored spearheads to move fast and strike in unison. But there was a catch. The German radios used AM amplitude modulation. They were noisy, prone to static, and vulnerable to interference. Worse still, not every tank had a transmitter. In many panzer platoons, only the commander's vehicle could send messages. The rest could only listen. If the commander was knocked out, the entire unit often went silent. The Soviet Union, with its mighty T-34, was even worse off. The T-34 was a marvel of armor and firepower, but for most of the war, Soviet doctrine equipped only company commanders with radios. Ordinary tank crews had nothing. Orders were still relayed by waving flags. Imagine that. The tank many historians call the best of the war was often reduced to 19th century signaling. In the swirling chaos of a battle, Soviet formations became blunt instruments, powerful, yes, but slow and clumsy to maneuver. Now, contrast that with the American solution. Enter the SCR-508. At first glance, it was just a metal box, crammed with wires, vacuum tubes, and crystals. But inside that box was nothing less than a revolution. First, it used FM frequency modulation. If you've ever switched from a scratchy AM station to the clarity of FM radio, you know the difference. On the battlefield, that difference was life and death. FM cut through static, drowned out interference, and delivered clear, crisp voice communication, even with engines roaring, shells exploding, and steel tracks grinding the earth beneath. Second, the Americans made it standard. Every Sherman, without exception, rolled off the assembly line with a radio installed. Not just command tanks, not just headquarters vehicles. Every single tank. That meant when a platoon of Shermans deployed, they weren't 5 isolated machines. They were 5 connected nodes, each able to talk, listen, and respond instantly. Third, the system wasn't just external, it was internal. The SCR-508 tied into an intercom system. Each crew member wore a headset. But instead of a normal microphone, they used a laryngophone strapped to the throat. This clever device picked up vibrations from the voice box itself, filtering out the deafening engine noise all around them. To a crew fighting inside the chaos of battle, it felt almost magical. 5 men, sealed in a tank, roaring across a field, yet speaking to each other as calmly as if they were in a quiet room. And then came the real stroke of genius. The Sherman commander could flip a switch and talk privately with his crew. Flip again, and he was on the platoon net instantly sharing information with the other tank commanders nearby. But the SCR-508 had 2 receivers. That meant a commander could listen to his platoon's chatter while simultaneously staying linked to the company or battalion net. He wasn't just commanding a single tank, he was plugged into a nervous system of steel, a living network stretching across the battlefield. This was the invisible edge. While German tank commanders often fought as lone hunters, straining to signal with their hands or waiting for orders to trickle down, American tankers fought like a pack of wolves. Each Sherman was one voice in a chorus. Spot a tiger? Call it out? Flank it? Coordinate instantly? Ambushed by infantry with Panzerfausts? Get artillery on the line before the Germans can reload. The radio gave the Americans what their opponents lacked: speed, coordination, and shared awareness. To the untrained eye, the Tiger's massive guns seemed more fearsome. The Panther's sloped armor looked invincible. But the most important weapon of all was silent, invisible, humming quietly inside a Sherman's hull. A box of wires and tubes, a set of headsets and throat mics, And with it, the Americans had turned their tanks into something far greater than machines of steel. They had created a battlefield network, one the Germans never fully understood. Imagine for a moment, you are a German Panther commander. Your tank is a masterpiece of engineering. The gun in front of you can pierce enemy armor with ease. The steel around you can shrug off most shells. You are confident, skilled, and deadly. And yet, you are alone. To communicate with the Panther beside you, you might wave your arm from the hatch or flash a signal. In the heat of battle, those gestures are clumsy, slow, and often misunderstood. Now step into the boots of a Sherman commander. Your gun isn't as powerful. Your armor isn't as thick. But you are not alone. At your fingertips is a switch that links you instantly to 4 other tanks. You speak, and your voice carries through invisible waves. Orders ripple out in real time. In seconds, your platoon is moving as one. You are no longer a lone hunter. You are the alpha of a wolf pack. That was the hidden genius of the Sherman's radio system. It transformed isolated machines into a living, breathing network. And that network became the nervous system of steel. Talking inside the beast. Inside a Sherman, the intercom tied the crew together. The driver could tell the gunner, "Hold steady, rough terrain ahead." The loader could warn, "Gun hot, next round ready." The commander could direct everyone at once. Target front, 400 yards, fire. What might have been chaos inside a roaring, rattling, smoke-filled machine became coordinated action. This mattered more than you might think. In German tanks, crews often shouted over the engine noise. Misheard orders could mean disaster, hesitation, wrong targets, wasted shots. In a Sherman, the radio headsets and throat mics cut through the noise. The tank became less of a machine and more of a single organism, 5 men thinking, moving, and striking as one. Talking to the pack. But the real advantage came when commanders reached beyond their own steel walls. With the flip of a switch, the platoon net came alive. 5 Shermans became a coordinated hunting party. Picture this. A lone tiger lurks behind a farmhouse. Through his periscope, a Sherman commander spots the glint of its barrel. Immediately, he calls it out. All call signs, Tiger, grid Delta 7, concealed by the farmhouse. In seconds, every tank in the platoon knows exactly where the Beast Island 2 Shermans roll forward, laying down smoke to blind the tiger. Meanwhile, the other 3 swing wide, circling into the tiger's flank. From the tiger commander's point of view, it seems like chaos, smoke, movement, sudden fire from the side. In truth, it's coordination born from clear communication. Within minutes, the tiger is knocked out, and the platoon keeps rolling. That's the wolf pack at work. Calling in the big guns. Radios didn't just link tank to tank. They linked tanks to the entire American war machine. Another scene. A Sherman platoon rumbles into a French village. Suddenly, German infantry bursts from cover with Panzerfausts, firing at close range. One Sherman takes a hit, flames licking at its engine deck. In the past, this would be panic, but the commander seizes his throat mic. Requesting artillery strike, danger close, my position. Within minutes, American artillery rains down. The village erupts in thunder, blasting the ambushers before they can regroup. The surviving Shermans push forward, supported by the storm they themselves called down. In that moment, the tank wasn't just a weapon, it was a node in a much larger network of firepower. The bait and the trap. Then there were the ambushes. The Shermans learned to use their radios, not just for survival, but for deception. Picture a panther rolling through a foggy French field. Ahead of it, a single Sherman appears, fires a few shots, then retreats. To the German commander, it looks like prey. Confident in his armor, he orders pursuit. What he doesn't know is that the Sherman's commander is calmly reporting every move over the net. He's chasing me. Approaching the kill zone. All units, prepare to fire on my mark. The Panther charges ahead straight into a carefully arranged trap. 4 Shermans, hidden on the flanks, open fire at once. Shots slam into its sides, its weaker armor torn apart in seconds. What seemed like German strength collapses into ruin, all orchestrated through the invisible threads of radio. 2 voices, at once. The final genius of the SCR-508 was its twin receivers. A Sherman commander could listen to his platoon net while also keeping an ear on the higher command frequency. That meant he always had two pictures of the battlefield, the close fight around him, and the wider war unfolding beyond. This gave American tank commanders something their German counterparts almost never had: situational awareness. They weren't just reacting to what was in front of their gun barrels. They knew where friendly infantry was moving, when artillery was firing, where air support was coming. They could adjust instantly, not minutes later when a runner or flare delivered the news. It was like fighting with one eye in the present and the other eye in the future. A different kind of weapon. The Germans built their tanks to be the best duelists, powerful in one-on-one combat. The Americans built their tanks to be team players, less intimidating individually, but devastating together. The Sherman's radio was the heart of that design. It was invisible. It was silent. But it turned every battle from a collection of isolated clashes into a coordinated assault. It turned a platoon of vulnerable tanks into a wolf pack. It turned commanders into conductors, orchestrating fire and movement like a deadly symphony. And most importantly, it turned the tide of battle time and again, in ways the Germans never fully understood. The irony is almost painful. German troops captured Shermans. They climbed inside, studied them, and even inspected the radio equipment. They could see the dials, the cables, the headsets. Yet time and again, they dismissed it. To them, the radio was a tool, useful, yes, but never the centerpiece of combat. They never grasped that inside those boxes of wires and tubes lay the secret that was defeating them. Why not? How could the nation that pioneered Blitzkrieg lightning war built on speed and coordination fall behind in something as vital as communication? The technology gap. Part of the answer was technical. German radios, the Fug 5 sets commonly installed in their tanks, were based on AM amplitude modulation. They worked well enough for higher-level coordination, but in the chaos of a tank battle, they were unreliable. Static, interference, and overlapping signals often reduced clarity to a garble of noise. And unlike the American system, not every German tank had both transmitters and receivers. In many panzer units, only the commander's vehicle could talk. The rest could only listen. This meant that if the commander's tank was destroyed, and it often was, the unit's ability to communicate collapsed instantly. For Americans, the loss of one tank was tragic but manageable. Others simply picked up the slack on the net. For Germans, the loss of a single key vehicle could silence an entire platoon. The difference was night and day. One army built a resilient network, the other built a fragile chain of command. A clash of doctrines. But the bigger reason wasn't hardware, it was doctrine. It was about how each side thought war should be fought. German doctrine exalted the commander as the genius on the battlefield. In their system, the panzer commander was expected to be a master tactician, spotting opportunities, making quick decisions, and leading his crew like a duelist, facing down opponents one by one. Communication was important, but the emphasis was always on individual skill, initiative, and personal brilliance. American doctrine was different. It didn't put faith in lone heroes, it put faith in the team. The U.S. Army trained its tankers to work as a collective, each man a cog in a larger machine. The radio fit perfectly into this philosophy. It wasn't about one commander outthinking the enemy. It was about many commanders linking together, multiplying their effectiveness through coordination. So when German officers looked at American radios, they often shrugged. To them, it seemed unnecessary. Why burden every tank with transmitting equipment? Why not rely on the skill of the commander, the sharp eye of the gunner, and the strength of the armor? The Germans saw radios as accessories. The Americans saw radios as the nervous system of their armored force. The legacy of Blitzkrieg. There was another reason the Germans didn't adapt quickly. Their own early success. Blitzkrieg in 1939 and 1940 had been devastating. Using the radios they did have, German panzers tore through Poland and France. Their doctrine seemed vindicated. Why change a formula that worked so well? But success bred complacency. The Germans assumed what had worked in 1940 would work forever. They didn't realize that while their methods were standing still, the Allies were leaping ahead, standardizing radios, perfecting FM, and building an army that could fight as a single organism. By the time the Germans recognized the scale of the problem, it was too late. Their factories were bombed, their resources stretched thin, and their ability to overhaul their doctrine was gone. The commander's blindness. The contrast was stark on the battlefield. Picture a German commander, standing half-exposed from his turret hatch, scanning the horizon. He spots movement, maybe American tanks, maybe infantry, but to relay orders to his unit, he has to shout, wave his arms, or rely on a radio net that only partly works. In the meantime, the enemy is already maneuvering. Now picture his American counterpart. The Sherman commander stays buttoned up, safe inside his turret. His voice crackles clearly through the platoon net. Tiger, 2 o'clock, behind the hedgerow. Flank left, lay smoke, move on my mark. Within seconds, his unit is executing a coordinated maneuver. By the time the German finishes signaling, the Shermans have already sprung the trap. For German tankers, the battle often felt like fighting blindfolded, isolated, unsure, and too slow to react. For Americans, it felt like fighting with eyes and ears everywhere. The missed opportunity. Historians still puzzle over why Germany never prioritized radio technology the way America did. The truth is, they had the opportunity. They had captured Shermans. They knew what they were facing. But their doctrine blinded them. They believed the war would be won by superior machines, superior armor, superior guns. They didn't see that war had evolved beyond the duel. It wasn't about the better gladiator in the arena. It was about the better network on the battlefield. And that was the German blind spot. They built tanks that were unmatched as individuals, but they never built the nervous system that could tie them together into something greater. By the time they realized their mistake, the Shermans were already everywhere fighting as wolf packs, calling in artillery, guiding fighter bombers, and dismantling the German juggernaut piece by piece. In the end, the Tiger may have been the king of the duel. But the Sherman, with its invisible web of communication, was king of the battlefield. And that difference doctrine, not just design, would decide the war. It was September 1944. The fields of Lorraine, France, lay shrouded in heavy fog. The war in Europe was at a turning point. The Allies had broken out of Normandy and were driving hard toward Germany. But the German army, battered but not broken, was about to launch one last desperate counterstroke. Into this fog rolled the brand-new Panther tanks of the German 5th Panzer Army. Sleek, powerful, and bristling with 75mm high-velocity guns, they were considered among the deadliest tanks of the war. Facing them was the U.S. 4th Armored Division. Patton's men, armed mostly with humble Shermans, carrying 75mm guns, tanks that looked hopelessly outmatched. On paper, it should have been a slaughter. Fog of war. The Germans believed the fog was their ally. Concealed by the mist, they thought they could smash through the thin American lines, scatter the Shermans, and buy precious time for the Reich. But the fog became a double-edged sword. While it blinded both sides, the Americans had a hidden advantage: their radios. Inside the haze, Panther commanders struggled to see, and struggled even more to communicate. Their orders were confused, their movements uncoordinated. Each German tank fought like a lone duelist, stumbling through the mist in search of prey. The Americans, by contrast, used the fog as cover. Sherman commanders spoke constantly over their platoon nets. Contact front, flank right, smoke deployed. They shared every sighting, every sound, every guess. Individually, their tanks were weaker. Together, they became a coordinated ambush machine. Voices in the fog. Accounts from Arracourt describe how Shermans turned the fog into a weapon. One crew would spot the shadow of a panther moving through the mist. Instantly, the word went out over the net. Another Sherman would circle unseen, while two more positioned themselves for crossfire. The panther, unaware it was walking into a trap, suddenly found itself hit from the sides. Again and again, this pattern repeated. Shermans sacrificed frontal duels in favor of teamwork. Panthers, designed to dominate in one-on-one combat, were cut down piecemeal by packs of Shermans working in concert. And when the Shermans needed more than their own guns, the radios reached farther. Artillery batteries waited on call. Infantry support was a radio message away, and most devastating of all, the sky, the thunderbolts. As the fog lifted in bursts, the Shermans became the eyes of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Tank commanders, still inside their machines, picked up their microphones. Panzers spotted, coordinates confirmed, request airstrike. Within minutes, the roar of P-47 thunderbolts filled the sky. Diving through gaps in the clouds, they dropped bombs and unleashed rockets, tearing through German formations. The Shermans, with their radios, had become forward air controllers, guiding destruction from above with precision the Germans could not match. To the Panthers, it was a nightmare. Tanks that should have been unstoppable predators were instead hunted from every direction by Shermans they couldn't see, by artillery they couldn't silence, and by aircraft they couldn't escape. The cost of blindness. The result was staggering. Over the course of the Battle of Arracourt, the German 5th Panzer Army lost more than 200 tanks and assault guns. The Americans lost fewer than 30 Shermans in return. Think about that. The Germans brought newer, stronger, technically superior machines into battle, and they were shredded. Not because the Sherman had better armor, not because it had a better gun, but because the Americans fought as a connected network, while the Germans fought as isolated individuals. Arracourt became living proof of the Sherman's invisible advantage. Radios, not armor, decided the outcome. Beyond the battlefield. The story of Arracourt was more than just one battle. It was a glimpse into the future of warfare. The Sherman's radio network was the seed of a doctrine that would grow in decades to come. Communication, coordination, and shared awareness, the very principles that defined modern armies, were proven on those foggy fields of France. From Korea to Vietnam, from Desert Storm to modern conflicts, American forces built their strength not simply on firepower, but on the ability to fight as a connected whole. In a sense, every satellite uplink, every GPS signal, every digital battle network today traces its lineage back to that little box of tubes and wires inside a Sherman tank. The legacy of the Sherman. The M4 Sherman will never win awards for being the biggest or the toughest tank of World War II. Against a Tiger in a straight duel, it was at a disadvantage. Against a Panther in open ground, it could be outgunned. But the Sherman wasn't designed to fight duels, it was designed to win wars. Its true strength was not the steel you could see, but the signal you couldn't. The steady voices over the net, the calm commands in chaos, the invisible threads binding platoons, companies, and entire armies together. The Germans built better individual machines. The Americans built a better system. And, in war, the system wins. So when you next see a Sherman tank on display in a museum, rolling in a parade, or roaring across a movie screen, don't just look at the armor or the gun, look closer. Imagine the headset clamped to a tanker's ears, the throat mic pressed against his neck, the quiet hum of a radio set alive with voices. That invisible hum was the real weapon. That was the edge the Germans never understood. And that was how the Sherman helped win the war.